Thank you very much for everybody for joining us today for the second EAZA Animal Welfare Webinar of 2025. My name's Ellen Williams. I'm going to be your host today. We are absolutely delighted to be diving into a bit of an aquatic theme for February. And we have got Claudia Tay here. Claudia is the Manager of Animal Welfare and Behaviour Science at S.E.A. Aquarium in Singapore. She's joining us a little bit later than the majority of us this evening, so we're very grateful for her time today. Claudia is overseeing efforts to enhance the welfare and the care of the aquarium's diverse aquatic species. And her role focuses really on implementing those evidence-based practices to, okay, great, thank you, to develop behavioural management programs that are going to promote animal well-being. Claudia's working on animal welfare globally, so she is working on the EAZA Animal Welfare Working Group. She's also on the WAZA Animal Ethics and Welfare Committee, and she sits on the S.E.A Animal Welfare and Ethics Committee. So she's got a real commitment to driving forward the progress in animal welfare today, and we're absolutely delighted to have her with us. And Claudia is going to be talking today about swimming towards better welfare practices for fish. So thank you, Claudia. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
All right. Thank you very much, Ellen. Really delighted to be here. So yes, in terms of timing, definitely different. It's dark out, but it's not too bad. It's 8 p.m. now. Yep. So hi everyone. My name is Claudia. Just here to talk about fish today. And what I'll be going through, this is the stuff I'm going through today. So the introduction, fish cognition and sentience, current indicators of fish welfare, challenges of fish welfare, and fish welfare at sea aquarium. So just as an introduction to who I am, so hi, I'm Claudia. I'm actually based at S.E.A Aquarium, which is located on Sentosa Island, Singapore. So firstly, Singapore is already a very small island, but the Sentosa Island is an even smaller island, and we're on the south of Singapore. And that's where I work, where I'm the Animal Welfare and Behavior Science Manager. So I do look quite a lot at animal welfare, so animal welfare assessments, as well as training, enrichment, research. So quite a lot under me, but very happy to do that. And on top of that, I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Adelaide. And so juggling both is not fun at times. But of course, what else would my PhD be in, right? Animal welfare. And yeah, so very excited to talk to you all today about something that's quite close to my heart now that I joined an aquarium. I was actually from the terrestrial world for a good 9 years, and only switched over to this side about 1.5 years ago. So it's been quite exciting. And oh, also apologies if I suddenly cough halfway while I'm kind of recovering from a flu, so I sound a bit nasally. All right, and so just this is how the aquarium looks like. Right now we are pretty small. Our largest animals are the manta rays. We have three of them, and we are actually expanding. So if you ever do come to this part of the world, do visit us. Probably we'll open a first half of this year with lots of fish and other cool stuff. Right. So before I go in, just as a general overview, how many animals in this whole entire world are fish? So I'm not sure. I think you'll be able to see that if the screen is large enough. It's that there's about 2.16 million animals in this world. Insects, not surprisingly, making up half of it at 1.05 million. And for fish, we're right there. So actually, that's still quite a lot. It's the largest vertebrate group compared to the rest. And even then, it's only 1.7%, but still pretty large. Now, how about zoos and aquariums? So this was interesting to me. I took this information from ZIMS to see how many individuals do we have in the zoos and aquariums that are in ZIMS. And for mammals, it's about 7% of total animals are mammals. Birds and reptiles, birds being about 7% as well, reptiles being 2%. Nothing surprising there, I think. Amphibians, not that many, about 2%. And the more interesting ones, invertebrate at 57%. And I'm not going to make you do any math. Fish being 25%. So just imagine that a quarter of our animals are fish in zoos and aquariums. So this study, by Sally, right, was actually seeing what's percentage of animal welfare publications from zoos and aquariums and what taxonomic groups are they. I don't, I mean, if we go by the number of animals that we have, technically the one of the largest ones should probably be invertebrates, but I think we know that's not the case. And actually, not surprisingly as well, vast majority of animal welfare publications are of mammals, even though they only take up a very small percentage of total animals in zoos and aquariums. And unfortunately, just over there, we have fish, just here, which is a measly 2, which is about 0.7%. So considering that fish take up a quarter of our animals and only 0.7% of animal welfare studies are based on that, there's an obvious gap here. And that's why I'm hoping that today I'll be able to talk a little bit about it. And from there, we are able to explore this more. Coming from the zoo world, I think some places, whether we like it or not, maybe the fish are not the main part of the exhibit. It could be another mammal, and then you have a little pond and fish inside. But even then, these fishes are still part of our collection. They're still our responsibilities. And I think it's really important that we address them as well. So why is fish welfare relevant? Well, if you have fish in your facility, even if they are in a pond in front of your office, they are still relevant and their welfare should be important. So the large number of fish that we have, I think that's pretty clear that we should be looking at fish welfare because they do make up a 25% of our collection. Next one, I think, is about the ethical responsibility. We should provide the best care for animals, even if they're not the main attraction of the exhibit. Next is a social license. So this social license is the informal approval and acceptance that an organization or practice has from the community and society at large to operate. So in terms of keeping animals, it involves public perception and trust regarding how animals are treated, managed, and cared for. And I think since we work with animals in captivity, this is pretty important to us. And lastly, something I'll talk about today is that fish have demonstrated cognition and sentience. Right. So going into fish cognition, I think at least for myself and probably for a lot of us, we always hear this thing, right? Goldfish memory. I guess some movies as well portrayed a certain fish as
So
not
you
having good memory. And so I thought it was pretty funny to put this, right? There's a lot of these out there, funny jokes about fish not having good memory. I like this one as well. I think this is very relevant when you're at a conference and then you hear someone's name for the first time, forget it straight away. But actually, for goldfish, in fact, they can retain their information for months. So some studies have actually shown that they can remember specific tasks, locations, and even recognize their owners over time. And they do have learning capabilities, and you can actually train them, and they can keep this association for weeks or even months. So next time, I guess if someone says you have a goldfish memory, just take it as a compliment. So in terms of fish cognition, they have shown a lot of cognitive abilities. This is really just at the beginning. I think that we have a lot more to go. And a lot of these studies that I'll be talking about are actually done in lab. I think labs, a bit of farm, a lot of aquaculture, not so much of aquariums and zoos. So there's one advantage of that. I think essentially anything we do in this arena is probably novel. So fish cognition, they have exhibited cognition firstly by simple learning, numeracy, spatial cognition, as well as social connection. Right. So in terms of simple learning, um, studies have actually shown that fish are able to associate specific cues with food availability. Like they found that if a light signal is paired with feeding, sort of training, right? Fish will begin to exhibit feeding behaviors upon seeing the light alone. They also have been observed to solve mazes or puzzles to assess food rewards. And so for this experiment that they did, they actually looked at building 3 different types of tea mazes with 2 arms. So they did this on zebrafish. So zebrafish are actually very one of the model species that a lot of labs work with. So actually quite a lot of this in terms of cognition and sentience were done on zebrafish. And so for this experiment, they actually had two arms of a tea maze, one having the food and the other not having it. It was just neutral, so there was a lack of reward there. And then they were actually marking the two arms differently to see whether the animals were able to recognize which ones had food. And so they tested the abilities of them, and they did find that they were able to go to the correct side. And this was a significant difference to find food. So they can learn. And for myself, I do train fish, which is very exciting to me. And I think definitely have some form of learning for sure. Like how sometimes for some of us working with fish, even when they see you being overhead and they know, when I see this head coming out of the water, it's food time, and you see their behaviors changing differently towards you as well. So I think it's quite clear cut that fish definitely can learn. To what extent, I think that's not been established yet. But definitely in terms of simple learning, most fish are able to. The next one is numeracy. So a bit different. I think sometimes when we look at fish cognition, we also have to recognize it's a bit different from, say, humans. So while they're not able to do stats, even though I wish then they could help me with my papers. They have demonstrated some form of numeracy, which is the ability to understand and process numerical information. So it's not as advanced as saying, but they showed some quantitative discrimination. So they can differentiate between different quantities. Um, so they found that in guppies and cichlids in this study, they actually could discriminate between different quantities of food, with one being larger than the other. And they were able to consistently select the larger set, showing that, hey, we can recognize numerical differences. So as I said, it's not like they can solve, well, at least not what they see. They're not able to do high level, I guess, numeracy, but they're able to tell the differences very consistently. And they did explore a bit of addition and subtraction. And so the fish were presented with a situation in which the number of items in the set could either increase or decrease, and they were able to make the appropriate choice. So they're actually able to discriminate not only between different quantities, but also understand basic operation. And this was done in guppies and cichlids in a lab. Right. The next is spatial cognition. So the environment for some of the fish are very complex. For example, fish that are in coral reefs, it can be very complex and they need to remember specific routes and landmarks. And they have found that, hey, fish are adept. They can navigate complex environments and they can also remember specific routes and landmarks, showing that they do have spatial memory. So they can remember and navigate to certain points that they need to, whether it's to find food, whether it's to avoid predators. They can remember shelters. They also have some form of a cognitive map, and they can use landmark cues to navigate. And in the study, they found for this bronze corridors, they tested with spatial memory tasks where they had to use environmental landmarks to locate food rewards in 3D. So I think that's one cool thing, at least for me coming from the terrestrial side, going into this aquatic side, is that a lot of they're 3D, right? Because your body of water is huge, and it's not just plain flat, but they can go up and down. And so they were able to locate food both horizontally as well as vertically. So that's what they found, that they were able to do that. And in terms of 3D, right, three dimension, this is more complicated than 2D, and still they were able to accurately navigate and remember the locations of food. So I thought that was quite interesting. And they also retained this memory and were able to do it consistently. So fish can learn and can remember spatial information. Right, the next is social cognition. So in this case, they have exhibited social learning by observing the behavior of others. So an example for this is, just trying to click that. All right. They found in nine spine sticklebacks, they found that they were able to learn strategies by seeing others. They could solve a foraging task. So the task that they required was that between two types of food, one was higher quality than the other. And when they observed the demonstrators, so the ones that were actually not going through the experiment to demonstrate that they could have more food, a better food, they actually started learning that, that, that fish seems to have a more profitable lot and we prefer that. And so they actually followed social cues to guide where they explore and where they forage, just based on learning from other sticklebacks. I thought that was really interesting, that they were able to learn socially as well. And of course, I think all the shoreline fish, schooling fish, they also do have some form of social cognition to learn from the others. So this is just one example. If not, I'll be here for a very long time talking about fish, which I'm very excited too, but yeah. Oops, sorry. So next one for fish sentience, they have demonstrated sentience through various behaviors and scientific findings. I believe that in fish sentience, some are a little bit clearer and some are very much in the exploratory phase. So I think pain perception is quite a clear one. Um, Although I know for a long time people like, do fish feel pain, right? That's one of the common questions that they have. Next one is stress responses. And lastly, emotions, right? So sentience is the ability to experience feelings and sensations. And I believe that there's quite a lot of evidence showing that yes, fish do have sentience. So for pain perceptions, fish do possess nociceptors. These nociceptors are specialized receptors that actually detect harmful stimuli. So they have actually I guess for an experiment, that must not be fantastic for the fish, but when they were exposed to painful stimuli like punctures or temperatures that they're not comfortable with, they actually showed stress responses, they showed altered behaviors. And they also showed avoidance. So where they experience pain in a particular area, they actually avoided it. So they do have an awareness of harmful situations, so they can actually feel the pain there. And so a study showed that when fish were exposed to painful stimuli, they exhibited stress responses and altered behaviors. So they do feel pain. So I guess, I don't know. I guess people ask me if fishing occurs, how does that work? I'm like, possibly they may feel pain. Yeah, sure, I shall not go there. Okay, next one is stress responses. So this is a bit of both a physiological change as well as a behavioral change. So in stress, fish can actually show elevated levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, part of your glucocorticoids. And so they actually are able to perceive and react to threats. You also saw behavioral indicators. So fish may exhibit behaviors such as increased hiding, erratic swimming, or changes in feeding patterns when they were under stress. And so there are quite a few studies done here for stress responses. In fact, it seems that a majority of the studies looking at fish sentience were concentrating on stress a lot more. And just as a sneak peek, another study that I'm doing, stress responses tend to be tested the most in terms of physiology, a bit less on the positive side. But yeah, they did find that. So fish do experience stress. Also, when the environment doesn't meet their biological needs, and chronic stress can lead to long-term problems. And that could mean like behavior changes and even immunosuppression, which could lead to disease and death. Right, so the study, they actually looked at the effects of crowding of fish. So I was saying just now that a lot of the studies that are available in terms of fish cognition and sentience are either done in labs and a little bit in the aquaculture setting. So in this case, they look at fish in the aquaculture setting and they actually tested these fish. They looked at cortisol. They also looked at other blood markers and they did find that there was an increase in cortisol when they were placed in a much, much more crowded area compared to before. So they do have that an elevation in stress hormones. But of course, for stress responses, it can be a bit tough to test hormones sometimes. There are a few different ways. One, which may be a bit stressful also for the animals, actually taking their blood cortisol. So they're just taking the blood and testing it for cortisol. But there's a little bit that's done in the water, cortisol in the water, and that could be something we could explore. Again, this was done more in labs and in a lot of farm fish like tilapias. And lastly is emotions. So emotions to me is very okay, I keep saying things are interesting, but I really think this one was um in the infancy stage, I think of all the others, right? Emotions, even for mammals, emotions are something that we recognize that a lot of them have, but we are sometimes not able to pinpoint it as much. I think even for humans ourselves, sometimes we don't even know our own emotions, right? So what are emotions? Emotions are essentially psychological states generated by the experience of events that are either rewarding or punishing. So an emotion like happiness for us could be um, when I eat my favorite food, I get really happy. And then fear could be when I get scared by my friend jumping up behind me. I don't know. Right, sorry. Again, apologies, I'm a bit sick. Yeah. Right. So in terms of emotions, they're definitely shown some type of emotions. Is it exactly what we experience? Yes or no? Again, infancy stage. Apologize again, and not feeling well. Right, in terms of behavioral changes, fish have actually shown some kind of response. The most obvious one I was talking about stress related in terms of response to threats or social challenges. Some a bit more like color change, so they can actually respond to some kind of stress or aggression, and then they change their colors depending on this. And it is an interaction between the emotion and physical states. But again, I say infancy stage in terms of emotions. And a study, zebrafish, they actually showed fear anxiety when they added alarm pheromones to the water to see what the fish would do, and they actually did show fear and anxiety, and it was quite consistent on that they had this heightened respiration rate at faster rates, and this was also seen in the bioelectrical signal analysis that they did. So there's a potential, and a lot more work to be done in this area for sure. Okay, so in terms of fish welfare, what are indicators, right? And again, this list is not exhaustive. I think this is what is currently being done, and hopefully in the next few years, they will discover a lot more that are very consistent. So in terms of, in this case, these are all animal-based indicators. Stress hormones is the same, cortisol level. It could be elevated cortisol could indicate stress. So that's measuring, as I said, cortisol in blood or tissue samples, even like gill clippings. Immune function. So fish do get immunosuppressed quite quickly from what I can see. They do get a reduction in terms of immune system if they're under stress. Like if the environment is not good, they are a lot more affected than say a mammal, right? Generalizing here, but that seems to be the case. So for respiration rate, in terms of gill functions, they can have increased respiration rates or abnormal gill function, and those could indicate a poor environment or even stress in the animal. Growth rates. So in terms of weight, which I know is difficult to weigh our fish, so maybe we look more at length, and consistent growth rates align with what the species normally grow to would suggest perhaps at least not a stressful environment and a maybe neutral environment or even good. But a standard growth will actually show that there's some issues. And normally it's the environment, if not environment, then diet. That could be an indicator of fish welfare. Next one is body condition. So this one is interesting to me, looking at body condition of the animals. Done a lot with terrestrial side, but I think fish we're just starting to pick that up. And I thought it'd be a bit, I'll talk a little bit about this later, but we're also picking it up on our side. So you look at the body fat, you look at the muscle mass. And lastly, for fish, the other part is the mucosa and then the fish mucus. And that could indicate various health and environmental issues. Yeah. And in terms of right, so in terms of behavior, so feeding behavior, healthy fish typically they would exhibit an active feeding behavior, a lack of interest in food, changes in eating habits that could indicate stress or illness. For social interactions, depending on the hierarchy, what type of animals are they socially, and increased aggression or signs of bullying may indicate overcrowding or inappropriate social groupings. Swimming patterns, that one's quite obvious with some of them. They are usually active and they engage in normal swimming pattern, but then if they are not feeling well, they will show lethargy or erratic swimming. That could be showing signs of distress or health issues. Like quite a few animals might keep surfacing up when they don't normally do that in the wild, and that could be a stress indicator. Hiding and avoidance, so using of hiding spots, maybe they use shelters and then they hide even more compared to usual. And the other one is surface breaching, so they could breach the surface. And some animals, especially with fish, they do have a tendency when they panic that they might even jump out of the water. So I think we need to be very careful of that because it's a startle response. From what I have seen in fish, not just at my facility but others as well, is that when they get spooked, right, they might ram themselves into certain areas and they actually receive trauma or they might even jump out. And so the environment Not that it's not important for other animals, but I think in particular for fish, is really, really important. And sudden sounds may actually scare them into having a startle response, or even they're trying to escape a predator, for example. But saying all this, I think for me transiting to this aquatic world, I realized the challenges of fish welfare. I think things that I was able to do very easily on the terrestrial side was much, much more difficult to do here. For example, I was like, oh, I want to do a certain kind of enrichment, and I realized, salt water. I can't use this material. Or things just break down so fast in salt water, and it was a pain. But I understand the limitations. So in terms of challenges of fish welfare, there are a lot, but these are just the main field I'm highlighting. The first one is limited research. There is such a big knowledge gap compared to terrestrial animals. I mean, we've seen there are so many studies on mammals and a lot less done on fish, even though we have so many fish in our collection. So, unfortunately, less research is done on fish welfare, and it does limit our understanding of them as of right now. Right, the diversity of fish species, they are so different, right? If you talk about primitive, those jawless lampreys, all the way to a diverse bony fish, to a shark, they are all pretty different and they don't even look like they're in the same taxonomic group at times. And that also means that it is meaning that a lot of studies have to be very species specific, and there's so much. Next, I was talking about the complex environment. Firstly, we have to try and replicate what they have in the wild, and that is talking about water quality, the water temperature, try and give them areas which they can thrive in. And also, the aquatic environment tends to be very dynamic, and that may be something that's missing a little bit in quite a lot of our exhibits for our animals. Lastly, social dynamics. So many fish are social animals and their welfare can actually be influenced by the dynamics. And so understanding these interactions, also a lot of the tanks in aquariums, especially they tend to have numerous species. So how do they interact? How do they get along? Is there aggression? What's happening? I think that there's a lot there. So I said this is the last one, but it's not. There's one more. And there's a lack of standardized protocols. There are not as many universally accepted welfare standards, like all those best practice guidelines. There are a little bit, but it's not a lot compared to how many species there are. But I said the silver lining to all this is whatever we do is pretty much new. Yep. So again, lots of challenges for us and something for us to work on. So I'm very excited to be here because let's just work on all this. Right. So at Sea Aquarium, when I talk about fish welfare, I look at it across these four themes. So animal welfare, behavior management, research, and external partnerships. So I'll just talk a little bit about this is what we have right now at our aquarium. So in terms of animal welfare, broadly broken into three things, which are policies and guidelines, assessments, and staff engagement. So the first one, policies and guidelines, it is having an animal welfare policy. Without it, it's very difficult to continue doing our work in terms of animal welfare. And that has to be updated because, I've seen some animal welfare policies, they're still talking about five freedoms that perhaps is a little bit outdated. So this needs to be updated from time to time. Having animal ambassador policies. Some of our fish are ambassadors. So it may not be the traditional sense where you're like carrying a fish, kind of difficult to do that. But if they have interactions with visitors, then there should be some form of policy that does look at their welfare, protects them. Of course, animal welfare concerns reporting procedure. So if anyone has any concerns, they are able to bring it up and that it will be able to be investigated fairly, transparently. I think that's very important. And lastly, a specialized health management plan. So this is looking at animals that are geriatric or chronic, but I know that there are some challenges to aquatic side. Some of it is you may not be able to isolate a certain individual if they have a whole school or the tank is really, really big. I think being able to identify the individual sometimes is also difficult. Like in a school of 300, to be like, that's Percy right there, has its challenges, but also not something we should shy away from and something that we should definitely be looking into. In terms of assessment, so for us here at Sea Aquarium, we are actually looking at doing animal welfare assessment annually for all our species. We have, as of right now, close to 800 species, and that would probably increase. And so this round we started in September 2024. We are currently looking at 40% of species. And when I say animal welfare assessment, I don't just mean fish. I also mean corals, which is anemones. It is a little bit interesting to assess the welfare of corals because the assessment is broken into the four physical domains of the five domains. But behavior tends to be a little bit tough to do with corals. Part of one of the questions I asked is about training. I don't think we can train corals. I'm trying to think of training individual polyps. I don't know whether it's possible, but we are doing the animal welfare assessments for all, and we want to be able to do this yearly so that we can see how we're doing right now. Are we doing anything better, and what should we improve on? And the other one's having a quality of life assessment, so that just looks purely at all the animal-based indicators and what the animals are exhibiting. And this one is probably done more for the chronic illness, so those that have chronic diseases or illnesses or issues, as well as the older folks. In terms of staff engagement, not that animal welfare doesn't apply to a lot of people, but sometimes we are very busy and we tend to forget things. So on our side, we have workshops. So a ton of workshops, probably to do more for like introduction to animal welfare, and then a little bit about training and just upkeeping with the current new knowledge that we might get. The next one is having staff engagement sessions. So on our side, we have this monthly engagement session where a lot of our staff from the different parts of S.E.A Aquarium actually sit down and listen to some talks. So that is the best part to indoctrinate. Okay, the best part to introduce animal welfare, and so that it's in the forefront of people's mind. They're like eating lunch and they're thinking of animal welfare. That's the strategy. And last one it's a little not exactly staff engagement, but kind of is this thing that we started. It's called the Natural History Info Pack. So it is this little Excel sheet where each species have their own info pack. So it is looking at maybe a lot more the natural history, things like what's their lifespan like, where's their habitat, what's the water temperature that they're from, and then also looking at what behaviors do they show, how do they forage. So all these are very useful. One, when you do animal welfare assessments and you're trying to see are they able to have what they experience in a wild compared to in captivity. Is it the same? What's the difference? So that's one. And also for enrichment in terms of being able to elicit natural behaviors, this is also very useful. So we're trying to cover all species. We started not that many months ago. We were at 25.9%, which is a quarter. I think it's pretty good already. But we're aiming to finish all this. And we're not making it too complicated because I don't think anyone has the time to read a whole bunch of things, but we try and highlight the key points. And then we also have behavioral management, so enrichment, training, and problem solving. So in terms of enrichment, this is providing animals stimuli in the form of behavioral opportunities. And we also have an animal enrichment framework. So just listing how animal enrichment goes, what are the safety aspects, what are the steps, which is important because safety is normally an issue, could be an issue if not addressed properly. Training, something I really like a lot. For our site, we use positive reinforcement training where animals have a choice to participate. And it's particularly important for some species, well, where quite a lot of them, because in a mixed tank, how are you able to get this certain species to you? Do you have to go in and swim after them? It's stressful for everyone. And so our main aim is actually to reduce the stress in animals for medical procedures. So we want to be able to recall them. And then we also want to be able to do certain procedures where it's not too stressful, maybe even things like treating wounds or being able to touch them for medical purposes. That is our main aim. And we do have a lot of species and we are concentrating, we prioritize and chose a certain few to work on right now. But it's been really fulfilling to me, although very challenging at times because like one of the projects I'm working on is training quite a few, like about 30 of a particular fish species, and it's a bit difficult because we have a lot of other species in the tank, and you don't want to accidentally train the others as well. So it's an ongoing challenge, but it's very satisfying to see when they're actually quite responsive. And they definitely learn, right? As I talk about fish cognition, no doubt about that. They definitely learn. Sometimes I think they train me. And we also have an animal training framework. So this one is important. Again, to just lay out what should be done, what shouldn't be done, and how we go about doing training. So For training, for example, we do have the shaping plan. We want to be able to see what is our goal, why are we even doing this, and what steps should we take to reach this behavioral goal that we're looking at. What's needed in terms of the tools, as well as who should be involved and any safety issues. I realized working with aquatic animals, especially when you're doing surface training, one very important safety issue is don't fall in if you had to perch at the end. Yeah. Didn't have that problem when I worked with terrestrial animals, but something here. Lastly, problem solving. That's really just to identify, study, and solve any behavioral issues. There are some abnormal behaviors that fish do exhibit, erratic swimming being one of them, or even stereotypic swimming. And so this is the part where we want to solve any of these behavioral issues. Right. And in terms of research, we are kind of split into two, fundamental and applied. So when I talk about fundamental, I'm really just talking about something that we increase understanding of the animals and or improve their welfare. And that could be something that it's not too complicated, something just looking at what do the animals do, right? In 24 hours when we leave the aquarium, what do they do at night? Are they sleeping? Are they swimming? What? Like, I have no idea. And so I think it's pretty important to have this base that we know what our animals do and perhaps highlight what we may not be so good at and also work on other things, right? And the other thing I realized about aquariums as well is that a lot of us have artificial lighting. That also means that that might affect their behavior. And so we want to be able to just have this understanding of the animals, right? Even just what are their cognitive abilities? That also could be something we do, not just rely on labs and aquaculture, but also on us that we're able to do that. The next one is applied research. So this one is, at least for our side, it's the impact of the environment or the humans, whether it's aquarists or the visitors, what do they have on the animals? And it could be studying visitor effect. For example, are the animals affected when there are more visitors? Or could we perhaps ask the screening panel and maybe decide the animals can't see out and decide they can. In terms of space use, are they using that side more? So I feel like I have so many questions, but so little time. And so, as I was saying though, there's not much done on fish in aquarium. So whatever we do will probably be new. And I also look at husbandry changes. So just one example of this is this little work that we were doing in our largest tank in our aquarium. So at that point in time, we were feeding once a day at 4 p.m. We had three different kinds of feeding all happening at the same time, which is surface scatter and in the water scatter feed and also targeted feed. Um, and we wanted to see if we change this, were we able to reduce some of the undesirable behaviors that the animals are showing, right? And we actually just increase the feedings. So in terms of husbandry changes, sometimes do we know if things work? If we introduce new things, we anecdotally may say, hey, yeah, this works, but maybe actually it doesn't. And so I think having something like that, something simple, nothing too difficult, just to see whether the changes has made any impact is really important. So I can't talk much more about this study, but eventually we'll publish it and then I can talk more about it then. But just an example of things that we can do. And lastly, we're looking at external partnerships. So we have quite a lot of external collaborators, whether it's WAZA, EAZA, S.E.A. It's quite different roles as well. We also talk about capacity building, so that could be attending conferences. I think it works both ways in terms of capacity building. One, on our side, we want to learn more from others. I feel that the aquarium world is a little bit different from the zoo world, a little bit more closed off as of right now, at least on in my side of the world. So we are trying to capacity build, whether it is reaching out to our regional aquariums, for to learn from them and also to help them in certain things. And that's one thing we find really important. So we don't just look at how do we make our animals experience good welfare in our aquarium, but also how are we able to influence others or help others in what they need a bit more help in. And lastly, in terms of accreditation, we think it's really important to also, well, see what we have and what we're not doing so good at and get external parties to see. I know it's AZA for now, but we'll see. Yes, ask my boss. But yeah, so this is what we have. And so, just as a conclusion, what do I want everyone to walk away from after today is that fish are sentient beings. They do feel pain. They do have at least some form of emotions. They do have stress responses, so they are not just objects. I definitely feel a lot more than perhaps what we used to think some decades ago. And the other one is that, I mean, I know it's a duh thing, but we have so much influence on fish welfare, and fishes are so susceptible to environmental changes. A change in a little bit of the pH is could be the end of them. And so we have to be very careful about what we do. And that's why we have to and we can do better for fish welfare. And I hope that today is just a little glimpse as to what we can do. Again, by no means perfect. We have a lot to work on, and we're also very happy to talk to other people. You know, if we can make improvements and all that, we're always learning. And I think I'm quite hopeful for our field. It seems to be picking up a little bit, and perhaps we can look more and more on fish. Yeah. And just as an acknowledgement, just thank you, Resorts World Sentosa, as well as EAZA for this opportunity. And all the people back at S.E.A Aquarium, they really work hard every day to provide the best welfare for all the animals. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. That's my email address. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Claudia. That was really fabulous. Really great presentation. We've got some questions coming in, so we will go to those. If we start with Callie, do you want to go first? Do you want to come on and ask your question? I can ask it. So you mentioned that there is a lot of care standards for fish. Are there any, sorry, not a lot of care standards for fish. Are there any standards that do exist that you would recommend people use?
Yeah, in terms of cares that they are a little bit done. I know sharks have quite a little bit done, raised a little bit, but in terms of bony fish tends to be less. So the standards normally is by EAZA or EAZA. I do look a little bit into the pet trade side, but very iffy about that, depending on whether it's reputable or not. But right now, I think even on our side, we're trying to build that up and find out what's good for our animals and what's not. So I would say probably just the regional associations for now.
Thank you. If we go to Danny, are you happy to come on and ask?
Hiya. When you complete welfare assessments, do you do it on an individual level or a species level, or do you do it per tank? Because I've worked in zoos and they tend to do it on more of the individuals. But obviously, if you've got a massive shoal of fish, you can't identify one individual. So how do you do welfare assessments basically?
So for us, for welfare assessments, we're not able to do individual for most of them, especially as you're saying, right, if we have 40, 15 in one. But what we do is per species, per tank, which means if a tank and some of our tanks are pretty huge and have like 100, then we'll do 100. Or even those that are the same species but they're in different tanks. So for example, we have a whole bunch of cleaner wrestlers, right? Great for maintaining, but we have them in different tanks. So we have to do for cleaner wrestlers for each different tank. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Claudia. So we've got another question, sort of a curiosity question. Which species have you been involved with the training programs?
So I admit right now it's a little bit biased towards elasmo brands. So I've been involved with zebra sharks or leopard sharks, depending on where you're from. Definitely, we also have the hammerheads that I'm looking at, cow-nose rays, spotted eagle rays. Yeah, so these are the priority. Oh, and the manta rays as well. So I realize there's a bit of a biasness, but we are looking at other species this year as well.
Great, thank you. Just related to the training question, you mentioned in your talk that there were some sort of challenges, and just so the question is sort of what were some of those key challenges other than falling in the water, and how have you sort of overcome some of those challenges? Have you got recommendations for overcoming those?
So yeah, besides falling in the water, the other one is I think the biggest challenge, two things. One is the material that we use. So not something I thought about before until I joined Aquarium World was even things like what like tongs do you use to feed? How are you feeding the animals? Because last time it's just take tongs, feed, done. But now it's like, oh, this will rust. Oh, this, if you don't keep it in proper condition, something will happen to it. And I think that was quite a big challenge in terms of looking at the material that we use for training. And the other challenge we have is the multi-species tank. How do I make sure I only train this one species and not the rest? And so that one means we have to be very targeted in terms of how we feed the animals. So if I'm training, say, the cow-nose race, I have to make sure that it targets straight into, with the cow-nose race and only them, and we don't reward the rest. And so there's less association. And when they keep coming out and realize there's no food, then there's less association and then they will go off. But it is an ongoing challenge. I am facing a bit of challenge with this species called the red drum. But yes, always work in progress, but these are the few things that we can work on. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Got another one. Have you got any examples of problems that have been identified from your welfare assessments, and how have you then approached fixing those problems?
So I realized for us, the majority of things that we're not doing so well in it's looking more a bit about behavior. And that's why the training came in. We was realizing that maybe we weren't able to monitor all of them and what could we spend more time in. And with that, we're able to also advise management like, hey, we noticed that we're not doing so well in this part. And we would like maybe more resources or more time to be able to do this, such as monitoring the animals compared to just like feeding and cleaning. So that's just one, but again, work in progress.
Great, thank you. Have you got any advice on how to take that to management? So if you identify those problems through your assessments, and have you got sort of ideas for people on how to then go to that next phase? Because obviously that involves cost, and how do you manage that?
I would say that having that as objective as it can be, but having the animal welfare assessment is very useful compared to just going out and saying, I need money to fix this. They'll be like, "Oh." But I feel when you have this and you say, see, we look at all of this and we notice this in particular is not great and we would really want to work on that, they tend to be a little bit better because there's some form of evidence that they're not doing so good at. So that's what I like. One of the reasons why I like animal welfare assessments, it is a bit more objective and can kind of get your way sometimes using assessments.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple more here. So this is a follow-on question. So this is from the first question that was asked. So that was in relation to legislation and standards. So you said in the answer to that first question that sometimes fish or hobby industry draft standards might be a bit iffy. Do you think that's due to misinformation about fish care in the aquarium hobby or industry? And is there anything that the aquarium hobby industry could do, in your opinion, to help elevate the quality of care that's provided to fish that might be pets, or to foster better communication between the industry and scientists at public aquariums, conservation, etc.?
So to me, I always love to collaborate. And I do think, so I was saying not all, but there are some experts in the aquarium, hobbyists that are amazing. They are able to look after the animals really well and maybe even achieve some breeding that we're not able to. So I think it is a bit of a loss sometimes when, we take it as a them versus us thing. But if we're able to work together, so not just with the hobbyists, but even with the labs on the aquaculture side, and we're able to consolidate and work on it together, it actually might be very useful for all our animals.
Great, thank you. I've got another question here. So you mentioned it's a little hard to train since it's difficult to isolate individuals. Would it be possible to train one fish and rely on social learning to speed up the process for multiple individuals, or would it be a good thing to be able to train more than one individual at the same time?
So this one to me was interesting because I saw it in the cow-nose race. So we have, as I said, we have quite a lot of cow-nose race, about 30 of them. And what's interesting was the more bold ones, right? We're talking about the continuing one, but entered the stretcher first because one of it was stretcher training. Wanted them to come in and go out at least at the beginning. And the bolder ones actually went in, had some food, and came out. And what was interesting was we saw the other cow-nose race like, oh, that seems to be social learning. And they actually started entering the stretcher when they saw their friend go in. And I think that in that case, it is possible to train that so-called one fish and get the other species to learn from them.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question here. Yutong Lin, do you want to ask your question? Oh, I can ask it. Do you think that using augmented reality in a zoo is one way to enhance animal welfare?
I think definitely being able to tap into the technology that we have now, way different from like a decade ago, is something that we can. So we talk about animal welfare, so in just education side, talk about guests, but the other side as well is I would say exploring maybe certain things that we're not able to do, and then we can use like whether it's AI or augmented reality to show guests certain things. I think that's quite a big one.
Great, thank you. Just a personal question leading on from that. Do you think we can use it as kind of enrichment for animals as well?
I would say yes. I mean, we don't want to have this individual sharks being like, give me my gaming, my games. No, I'm not working, I'm not swimming. But I think that we're able to do that, especially because a lot of fish are very, very, they use a lot of visual cues, right? Whether it's colors and all that. And I think we can explore that for a lot of our animals.
Fabulous. I think we might just have one more question here. So how do you think we should specifically be looking for positive welfare? So we talk a lot about in all industries, we tend to still sort of lean towards the negative, but in aquatic species where we know less to begin with, what do you think we should be looking for to make sure that they're experiencing positive welfare rather than just not negative welfare?
So I think one thing is play behavior, exploratory behavior. And on our site, we actually made this like bubbles, this little bubble curtain things at some of our big tanks. And we actually started seeing our animals playing with them. That they'll go in and like woo or loud and kind of swim around. And they seem to really enjoy interacting with that. So we did see some play behavior. And I think that's one. But yeah, in the animal welfare world, especially when we look at physiological indicators, we tend to focus a lot more on the negative side. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we oh, hang on. I was going to say I think we've got managed to reach the end, but we've just got another one come in. Lucy, would you like to ask your question? Oh, sorry, you don't have a microphone. I forgot. Are there any particular resources you'd recommend when researching your species during that sort of fundamental research phase?
So for us, like we were trying to do the natural history info pack, we realized it's quite lacking for some, like some species there's not very much done. And so we will try and troll through, firstly using a Google Scholar just to look at what scientific advice there is, and then if that doesn't work, we'll just go on the web and look at other things. But I would say that there's no particular resource that we can tap into because a lot are not being done. Yeah.
Yeah. Just related to that is another question on what do you think those sort of priority research areas should be? So across aquarium industries, what should we be aiming to do?
So I think a very big part is just seeing how whether it's our husbandry or the environment actually affects the animals. Like for example, I was talking about the lighting, right? When we talk about light in aquariums, it tends to be on top, one sort of light, this time of the day, same, and then we switch it off. But actually in the wild, there's directions, there is a fading of the light, there's a lot of that going on. How does that affect the animals? I don't know. That's something that we could look at. And then the other one also is just having mixed species, right? How does that affect some of the species having it? So I think there's a lot. And just even fundamentally, I was saying, what are the animals doing when we're not around? And I think that's another priority.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. We've got one more here. Tristan, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yeah. So, because I'm a vet nurse and I haven't worked with fish, but I work with sea turtles, and I was just not in an aquarium setting, more in a conservation setting. But I was just wondering, from your perspective, as someone that's more hands-on with the animals, is there anything that we can do when we come in from a veterinary like management perspective to continue this standard of welfare? Because obviously we're not so familiar sometimes in an aquarium setting with the individual patient's needs, and you guys do the hard work of training them to get in the stretchers. Is there anything that we can do when we're providing that care to maintain that kind of standard?
So I think ideally is that you'll be around as well. So let's say we're doing a training, then the vets are able to be there to work together with the vets in that sense, and be able to see the training and what's being done and what the animal perhaps be more comfortable with. So I think that's quite important if you're able to be together at the same time. So on our side, when I go on to the more higher level training, I'll start involving the vets, whether it's to like blood draw or even just to touch, because I think it works both ways. We also need to know what the vets would like, right? What is better for the procedure for the, let's say, the area the animal should be or how they should be turned. So I think there's quite a lot of that. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. That's really fabulous. If anyone else has any questions, then you can pop them in the chat, or you can come on to the microphone and ask them. But we're coming to the end of the time.
Yeah, if not, you can just email me. Just happy to chat. In fact, I might chat too much.
No, that's fabulous. Thanks so much, Claudia. I have put your email in the chat, but if you want to just flick back one slide so that people can just take a screen grab if they want to of your email address, and that would be perfect. Yeah, just then to say thank you so much for coming. That was a really fabulous talk, and sorry that we really grilled you there on all the questions, but it's really great to have your thoughts and opinions on where we can go, and I think that's going to be really useful to everybody, so very grateful. Thank you also everybody for coming along today. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this webinar. This will be on the YouTube channel fairly soon, along with all of our other EAZA Animal Welfare webinars, and then details will be coming out about the next webinar with Heather Bacon very shortly. So thank you very much, and thanks everyone for joining.